So just quick introductions for folks. Again, I'm Chris Lim. I'm the Executive Director with the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District. And I'll let folks introduce themselves since we're here in the room. Hopefully people can see us on the wide view.
And I'll change over now, so now you just get to look at me. My name is Ben Weiss. I'm the Ag Conservation Manager here at Contra Costa RCD.
I'm Courtney Kuhn, Resource Conservationist for Alameda County Resource Conservation District.
Jennifer Travis, Alameda County Resource Conservation District.
And Catherine Boxer, unfortunately, is not going to be able to join us. She had something come up. So you're stuck with us today. Okay, next slide. And yeah, just some Zoom housekeeping. We did just start the recording for this meeting. Please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. Please feel free to raise your hand during the presentation and we'll try to address them. We'll also have time at the end for people to ask questions. We will be monitoring the chat. So we have folks here who will be watching the chat for questions. So that's a viable way to get us questions as well. And if for some reason we don't get to them, we'll follow up with folks. All right. Oh, and one thing I do want to acknowledge that we're actually on Bay Miwok land today, unceded territory. And I hope that our work here today continues in their traditions of sustainability, stewardship, and living in harmony with nature. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. And I'll pass it off to Ben.
Thanks, Chris. Welcome, everyone, again. Like I said earlier, my name is Ben Weiss. I'm the Ag Conservation Manager here at Contra Costa RCD. And if you're feeling up to it, feel free to introduce yourselves in chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from. For today's agenda, we've got a pretty quick one. We want to give you some time here at the end to work with us and provide us some feedback. But ultimately today, we're really hoping to demonstrate and illustrate for you our draft regional priority list, which was sent about a week and a half ago, I believe now, with the meeting invitation. We'll send that out after too. So this will be covering ultimately how we derived that list, and then walking through a little bit of those steps and how we here at Contra Costa and Alameda RCDs formulated that list based on more or less the last year of what we've all been planning and doing. So we'll do that. Then we'll talk quickly about the next step in this, which is going to be actually ranking that priority list. We'll talk to you about what we're planning to do there and how we're planning to let you all rank that. We'll take a quick break here for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll turn into a feedback session because we want to hear what you have to say about this draft regional list. And then we'll provide some next steps and a path forward as we start to close this process out. So just as a quick recap, almost to the day, we had our first stakeholder meeting about a year ago, April 7th, 2021. At that meeting, we introduced you all to what this regional priority plan was going to be, what it's going to become. And as a quick reminder, if you want to go back and look at any of these are all on our website. You can view and watch any of these videos at your leisure, get a sense, try to take a peek at what and how we tried to form these lists. But back to the meeting. So at this first meeting, we created a set of maps that are also on that website, which I think Courtney is about to drop in chat for us here, more or less capturing existing conditions as we knew them based on the available data and GIS, and thanks to some of the project partners that gave us additional data to help us better inform some of the natural resource conditions on the ground as they relate to wildfire resilience and prevention. So then at our second stakeholder meeting in late June, we did a quick analysis on those existing conditions. We tried to find overlap between the sites, hotspots, metaphorically, where high spots of biodiversity and maybe also a threat of wildfire, to hopefully get folks thinking about potential projects, potential project areas where we wanted to see things and how we all are going to work together to protect natural resources. We took a couple-month break there and then met again in mid-December. And that's when we really started to dive into the project development part of this. So what we were trying to do, for those of you that weren't there at the December meeting, was really spur some ideas and some facilitation and get people in the room talking together to brainstorm just about generic projects and general projects or specific projects if they had them, just as we start to build out and establish some of our regional priorities and what we're trying to accomplish under this planning effort. Then we met again here in late January, and we walked through some of the project submission form that some folks filled out for us and got back to us. So thank you to those of you that did it. We also had some breakout groups to further discuss some high interest areas that we were looking to gather more feedback and provide people time just to brainstorm and chat and ask questions and get answers. We also did a quick analysis of some gap areas in Alameda and Contra Costa County, which kind of led into what we've been doing since you last saw us in February, March here, was trying to meet people on the ground and do some individualized outreach and really meet some folks and see where they're at and hear what they've got going on. If you want to continue to do that, please feel free to reach out to either Alameda RCD or Contra Costa RCD at either of our emails. I believe they're regional priority plan at ccrcd or at acrcd.org. We'd be more than happy to chat with you a little bit more about maybe questions you have on this. We want this to be of use to you. So, but that's more or less what we've been doing for the last month or so. And ultimately, we've been working to create this draft regional priority list. So I want to be clear that this was not a list that we here, Contra Costa and Alameda, just sat down and declared. We tried to more or less synthesize a lot of what you guys have told us over the last year and identify some broad regional priorities kind of in categories. We'll share them here in just a second. And I also want to highlight that, we're going to walk through these, try to explain some of our rationale, but that this is still a draft list. This is open for feedback. We want to make it useful for you guys. So if you have comments or questions or ideas, we'd love to hear them. Ultimately, this is a document that's going to support all the great work we're doing here in the county, we being all of the stakeholders on this Zoom and in this room. So it has to be useful for all of us. So let us know what we can do to make this plan useful for everyone. I will say, and you're going to hear this deadline a couple of times, just in the interest of keeping things moving, we're going to try to finalize all comments by April 15th. After that, we're going to take a few days, respond to some of those comments, get into it, maybe change up our draft regional list, and then ultimately have a final regional priority list by about midweek the next week. I think that's April 20th. And we'll talk more about that at the end. But for now, here's our draft regional priority list. These aren't in any order, and they are more or less just, I guess, large buckets or categories that we tried to organize common ideas, common themes, common projects that we heard throughout this entire planning process. So I will say that even in the last week, we've been kind of receiving some feedback on some of these, and we've already changed some of them. So these titles may actually differ a little bit from what the list that you initially saw. So today's kind of the most current version of it, but it is something that is being worked on and being discussed. So we'd love to engage with you more after this presentation, or maybe separately via email or over Zoom or something. Feel free to connect with us. But yeah, so really quickly now, we're gonna run through this priority list, kind of present how and why we organize things in this way. So first and foremost, we heard a pretty significant need within Contra Costa and Alameda County here for equipment, or I guess in general, large capacity building just across the board. So we decided to split it up into a couple of different categories. The first one here being equipment and personnel capacity building. This was easily one of the most talked about concerns and needs amongst our stakeholders that we heard from you, is that we don't have enough people to do a lot of this pre-fire work or pre-fire treatment on these projects. And this is when I say we, all the way up from large agencies down to nonprofits, down to individual members of the public. Remember, that's kind of our stakeholder base here. So likewise, we also had folks communicating to us that they need equipment. They don't have equipment they need, be it chippers or engines or other mechanical equipment to treat some of these sites or do the important fire work that needs to be done before the fire gets here. So we tried to capture all of these under this large heading here, equipment and personnel capacity building. We also heard a pretty significant need for long-term funding and fundraising. This was a topic at the breakout group that we held back in January, I believe, where there was a common need for just to have folks even write grants. That there are a lot of these grants out there, but a lot of folks are really lacking the staff or manpower to actually sit down and write the grant to do the important work. So we collected that here kind of as a need for increasing capacity within organizations or between organizations to work together to apply for grants and do some of this important work. So then the other big topic we had at that January meeting in the breakout group was broadening prescribed burning capacity. We know that prescribed burning is happening in Contra Costa and Alameda County, but there are folks that would like to see more of it, particularly on maybe some of their private properties or working together collaboratively to safely and effectively get prescribed burning out on the landscape as a means of fuel reduction. But we also heard that there's a lot of stumbling blocks between getting from here to there. So we created kind of this category here based on that feedback to address a lot of those stumbling blocks, be it lack of equipment, lack of time, lack of people, lack of knowledge, lack of burn bosses, increasing tribal capacity for cultural burns, or being a part of the prescribed burning process. So we heard a lot of needs around this and broadly stated this as a category. So then we also heard there was a pretty large need for just generalized fire education and outreach and knowledge sharing on the resources that are out there for partners that may already exist. So this ranges everywhere from outward facing to, educating a member of the public about the benefits of prescribed burning, or, why we need to be doing this in this specific area, to likewise internal knowledge sharing, trying to increase staff capacity, and establish best management practices and guides for fuel management across Contra Costa and Alameda County. We also talked about hooking private landowners up with educational workshops, webinars, and guides for available programs out there, such as the NRCS's Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and trying to make more people aware of those programs and the good work that they do. So then I think another large category where, and thanks to everyone that submitted projects, was this need for increased, both in number and size, fuel reduction projects across the landscape. We heard a number of different ideas as it relates to shaded fuel breaks and trying to increase the number and the size of those all over Alameda and Contra Costa. So we wanted to more broadly categorize that along with some other fuel reduction type projects, like increasing grazing enhancements or enhancing grazing improvements and getting grazing out on the landscape as a fuel reduction strategy. Likewise, working more collaboratively to tackle invasive species that are more prone to burning, particularly in some areas of the county that maybe aren't in the wildland urban interface or up in the rural areas, but still in natural areas and creek channels in the middle of cities and all that. So likewise, we also talked about wanting to develop water supplies out in the rural lands to have more available water for firefighting and for livestock enhancement out there, so that we are more broadly grazing greater parts of Contra Costa and Alameda counties. We also heard a need for some of the more, longer timeline type projects. It's great that we got all of these, I would call them one and done shaded fuel breaks, but there is a need for the long-term maintenance of that, and those are difficult to fund. So trying to set up some sort of mechanism to ensure, or at least start to think about, how are we going to long-term now make sure that the work we're doing stays the way it is, so that we're not coming back out every 20 or 30 years to treat the same sites over and over again. Likewise, we wanted to kind of get into some of the more longer term stuff on this by focusing on maybe some adaptive management planning for grazing plans and fuel standards under those grazing plans. We also heard a need to facilitate some sort of resource sharing between agencies and nonprofits together working on these projects. So we tried to kind of organize that by first making a list, of what resources are out there. There's certainly a number of them, and I'm sure if we asked everyone in here to drop a best management practice guide for some fuel project, we'd have probably 30 or 40. But just housing those all in one location and making sure that we're all working collaboratively to know what's already been done, what exists already, and not trying to duplicate work. Likewise, we also heard a need for kind of a project tracking map that would be useful to identify where projects are happening in Alameda and Contra Costa County, both as an educational tool, but then also kind of as a gap analysis tool. Where are projects not happening that need to be happening that we could have significant impact? So we tried to collaborate all that and get all that information under this broad resource sharing headline. And our final regional priority that we heard really was the need for being ready for the fire after it's already gone through, because there's a lot of natural resource concerns that happen post-fire related to erosion control. So making sure that if fire were to happen, that we have the information and the tools available to quickly work with landowners that may have just had a significant burn off of some previously forested lands. Likewise, having available plants and materials to stabilize hillsides and replant areas for natural resource benefit, as well as developing some landowner assistance guides to make sure that when we are recovering from fire, we're doing it in a smart way that's not going to become another problem down the road. So we broadly organized that under this post-fire recovery planning and preparation. And I believe that is the end of our, so that was our regional priorities as they exist today. Obviously, we're going to have some time for some feedback here at the end. So feel free to marinate on those, and we'll happily answer questions on that in just a second. But I wanted to take a quick second here and talk about what our next phase is going to be, ultimately ranking this draft regional or the final regional priority list, I'm sorry. So you're looking at some screenshots of a Google form that we're going to send around to our mailing list, which if you're here, you probably got. This is going to be how we are collecting this information and ultimately ranking the list of priorities that you just saw. So we will be requiring email on this, just so that way we can do some quality control and make sure that we're actually getting useful information and we're not getting spammed. Likewise, we're asking stakeholders to only submit the form one time. We will be able to see if multiple or the same email has submitted a form 3 or 4 times, and we can work around that. But if you would like to share that within your organization or with your peers or with someone that's vaguely interested in this, absolutely. We want this to be reflective of the regional priorities, and that only happens if we get out to as many people as possible. And I will say we're not looking for a single response from an agency. If there are multiple people within your agency or your organization, absolutely feel free. You're each probably going to have maybe slightly different regional priorities, but we want to hear from all of this because agencies aren't monoliths. They don't have one set way. So we want to make sure that we're supporting, or we want this plan to support you guys in the work that we're doing. So this first question that we're asking here is the big one. It's the only required question on this form. It's basically just rank your top 3 regional priorities. So you'll be able to, the titles may change, and we'll also include links to timestamped YouTube videos for each of the regional priorities here for your review. But you're welcome to email us and ask questions about specific categories and what our thoughts are on them too, if you would like to get some more information that way. So the first question here is the only one that's required. I keep having a thought come in and then leave. It may come back to me here in just a second. So we'll move on and see if it comes back. Oh, I remember the thought, sorry. So to go back, just because a regional priority doesn't receive any ranking on this list doesn't mean it's going to be cut. We're still going to include it as a regional priority. It just will have effectively no votes for it, so to speak. No one will have ranked it as their top 3 priority. So as you see it, this will exist. It's just we want to know what's the order here 1 through 8. And we'll share that out after. So then moving on now, so this is a 9-question ranking process, but we really only think it's going to take you guys a couple minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10. But the questions 2 through 9 are really just going to give us more information that we can turn around to give to state agency officials and other interested folks and really communicate some of the specific needs within each regional priority. So you saw some of the expressed needs that we heard directly from people as we tried to group these. We're asking you now to turn around and rank those so that within each regional priority, we can say, you know, okay, within this equipment and personnel capacity building priority, the number one project amongst our stakeholders was this, and the second priority was this. We're just looking to ultimately gather a bit more information to ultimately get a clearer picture of what the regional priorities and what the needs are here in Alameda and Contra Costa County. None of these questions are required, but it would really help us if you guys took these. We didn't want to make this cumbersome, so feel free to take the first one and skip, but if you can take the time, it'll really help us and ultimately better support you guys as you go out for funding when you can say, look, this was identified as a regional priority within capacity building, please fund our project, or whatever you're trying to do. Yeah, so with that, yeah, so right now we are in the middle of the comment period for this draft regional priority list that I just covered. That period is March 28th. That was the day that we sent you the invitation along with the attached regional priority list. We're accepting comments on that through April 15th. I believe that's a Friday. And then we will turn this back around to you ultimately to allow you to rank things on April 20th is our target date. And that'll give you, I believe that's about 2.5 or 3 weeks then to rank these regional priorities as we just discussed them. And that's ultimately going to be our plan. So once you guys get that information to us, we'll be able to turn around, write up the rest of this plan, and then ultimately present it to you here in early June is our goal. But first we need you all to rank it. So I believe that is the presentation thus far. All right, everyone, welcome back. Hope you got a quick little break here. We'll now kind of transition into our next phase here. Now I'll switch the camera back to me really quick. So we want to hear from folks now. Did we get the regional list right? We've got it pulled up. I can make it viewable in just a second for folks, but ultimately we want this time to be of use to folks to talk with us about, you know, yeah, that's great, good job, go RCDs, or hey, you know, you really missed the mark on this one, we need to talk about this. So I guess with that, I will open it up to the room now. Feel free to raise your hand using the Zoom functions, or if you would just like to unmute too, I can try to facilitate this just a little bit and we'll get some questions going.
Anything people are really stoked on.
Yeah, and we're happy to answer questions if folks have additional questions about maybe what some of the draft regional priorities were or how they were formed. We're happy to answer anything and all. We want this to be of value to you guys, so just give folks a minute here. Of course, if we got it in one and it's perfect, that's great too. All right, go ahead, George. I'm asking you to unmute now.
George Lane, Contra Costa Fire. This is my first meeting. Good afternoon, everybody. I have a question about the resources at risk. I understand the priorities for treatments of and all the other items that are on the list. But as a fire agency, I was just wondering if you'd already established a list of values at risk.
Yeah, so we are gonna talk, we do have that within our regional priority plan document, which we will be discussing a little bit in June. More of that, and Carol Rice, I think, can jump in too if she wants to, but a lot of that was derived from the existing conditions map and then the analysis map we did back in last year, I believe. Those are also on our website, which I think Courtney might be able to drop in chat here, but needless to say, we've got that kind of spatially, so you can see it on a GIS map right now, but we are planning to write that all out and have that included within the regional priority plan. Anything to add, Carol?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Courtney, for putting the link up. This is an online map that really looks at the many different overlays of, for example, fire behavior and critical habitat and special status species, water supply, and the importance of water supply to populations. So we did look at, and we emphasize the natural resources as values at risk, as contrasted from structural resources at risk, since this is a resource oriented kind of plan.
Thank you both.
Thanks for the question, George. Cheryl, you have a question.
Sorry, I didn't have my voice on. So when you talk about the best management practices for local fuel management, I have a sort of question suggestion.
Yeah.
Could those be organized by the ecosystems, like working in a riparian or working in a brush ecosystem or working in a forest ecosystem? Because that might help Diablo Fire Safe Council as we start to work in projects when we know there's certain regulatory issues or certain benefits we could have, as well as the fuel reduction. We might have some resource benefits. And so understanding what those best management practices might be in different ecosystems and how we might get those benefits. We use that from the very early project planning to during our grant writing to, of course, during our actual work.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we could certainly add that to the list of some of the things. We are looking for those types of information. We'll talk a little bit here in a second, I think, about our project list, but I think I can jump the gun too and say that, we did hear a number of projects that are related to fuel reduction work. We are kind of still looking for some of those projects that are maybe more on the outreach or education or the non-fuel related is what I'm calling it. We'll talk more about that in a second, but if folks have ideas like that, that'd be great.
But then this best management practice I see as an education outreach too.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
being able to do that early on before you actually do the work of what's the benefits and how much you do it.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Any other folks want to chime in? Oh, that was Cheryl just talking. All right, I'll just give folks another second or two here if they want to. Go ahead, Lily, and then we'll go to Tammy.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about how many folks asked to get into each group. Like, did you get an overwhelming number of folks wanting to know about education or adding that, or like kind of the metrics associated with how many questions?
Yeah, so the short answer is we didn't get this is more or less what we've collected over the last basically over the last years. So pretty much if someone has expressed something to us through a project or maybe, something said in this meeting or within an individualized outreach type of session, we tried to include it within these. I don't know if we have the specific metrics on who asked for what or who wanted this type of thing. Maybe we'd have to do a little digging for it. Go ahead.
We did the sticky notes.
Oh, that's true. We do have on our Jamboard session, we probably should be able to quantify a little bit of that. But we really tried to include anything that fit within the scope of the regional priority plan focus, which was mostly the wildland urban interface and then rural areas and working specifically on natural resource issues. That's a great point that we should probably go back and quantify that. And I think we can try to do that.
Also, we know that the two most popular groups, when we had those breakout sessions, were the prescribed burning and capacity building were the two most common. Also, when you're ranking the priorities, one of the questions is where people are coming from. So we'll have some idea of people's affiliations when we get that information.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lily. Go ahead, Tammy.
Hi, everyone. So I'm looking at the maps online, looking at the infrastructure, the community resources infrastructure, and I'm noticing that a lot of our water facilities and water infrastructure are missing from those maps. And for us, it's a huge concern as we've had a lot of fires in the area around some of our treatment plants and along the South Bay Aqueduct. And we are the water wholesaler. So again, if we get hit, then it's hard to get that water elsewhere. Plus, help fighting fires. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to incorporate that into your mapping and your prioritization.
Absolutely, yeah. We can connect maybe offline and we can get some of that GIS data from you. And if it's not something that you want broadly shared, we can just keep that in-house and include it in the plan as well. But absolutely, we don't pretend to say that this is the every single need and resource in this community. So we want, if you guys have data that you'd like to share, absolutely. Please feel free. So yeah, I'll follow up with you, Tammy, and we can get that data. Thanks.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dina.
Everybody?
How's it going?
Good. I have a couple of questions. So on the priority list, there's definitely things that are conceptual, generally described. And I'm wondering, as this process goes, because there is a cutoff coming, will there be any refinement in particular for ones that are identified as a high priority to further describe what it is that we want to do? And I'll give one example.
Yeah.
The cattle water infrastructure, there's something about, and you mentioned it in the beginning of, we need to develop more water infrastructure for cattle to be able to do fuels management using livestock grazing. But one of the challenges, a lot of our springs are drying up. And so there are these other things we need to start looking into, or doing more, like drilling wells or getting water from municipal providers, and all of that. It's expensive, and then also there's an administrative arm to the getting hooked up to the municipality. So those are the kind of things that would be helpful, I think, if we have time to be able to refine them down and make them more clear.
Yeah, I think we can try to do that. We obviously want to support any and all of these projects however we can through this planning process. I think we were trying to stay a little back from that and keep it very broad, but within that, I think there is some room to refine specifically some of these projects and include them within the list, because we're wrapping this process up. I think we're trying to end by the end of June here, but the priorities could change in a month. So we're going to try to make it broad so that it can broadly apply to a lot of these other projects that we haven't heard from. We recognize that we don't have everyone at this table that has natural resource interest or concerns here in Contra Costa and Alameda County. So we are trying to make it as inclusive as we can. And we'll probably continue to structure that, but that we could also probably get into some of those specific issues and refine those a little bit more, like you just said. So.
Okay, and then thank you. The other question just being, I had some additional ideas and I just emailed them to you, Ben, and it's kind of late, but I don't know how you want to, or if you can incorporate those for consideration for the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to, you can drop it in either of these emails here, regional priority plan at acrcd or ccrcd.org. I'm monitoring those, and Jennifer and Courtney are monitoring it down in Alameda County. So it won't get lost in my inbox. It'll instead get lost in its own inbox there, but we know it'll be there. So yeah, we're still looking to gather that sort of information. And if folks have it, we want this to work for you guys. So feel free, absolutely reach out.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Even say them now and might spur something in other folks.
Yeah, Dina, sorry to put you on the spot. If you wanted to share one or two of those, unless someone else wanted to ask a question or something, might spur more questions, we'll see, but yeah, go ahead.
Nobody else has, okay. Let's see, I guess the one was what I mentioned about the municipal water sources and like getting access perhaps during extreme drought to fire hydrants. Just some ideas about how to get water for cattle. And that's a really, it's the administrative process is onerous. It's trying to get a water meter for ag use is just, it's almost undoable. We've taken years to try to get one water meter in unincorporated lands in Contra Costa County. Years, and it's like.
I wrote the permit for that project, so yes.
Oh, that's right. You know all about it, right? Yeah, it's still going. So that would be really helpful to have support for that, like all of us trying to manage grazing, the admin part of it, and maybe even this could be sort of part of the cutting the green tape for fields management of just like, come on, can we make this any easier? And what would be the process to do so? So that was one idea. And then the other one, I think Ian Howell's on the list in the meeting. We did some work with talking about grass banking in the Contra Costa Alameda counties, and talking with different landowners and seeing what we could figure out with a grass banking approach to livestock grazing in the Bay. And I think that would be a worthy thing to pick back up. And the RCDs seem like a great fit for both of these things I'm mentioning, but that would be really helpful because it's just getting harder to graze lands in the Bay Area. And the more we work together, the more likely we'll be able to keep that as a management tool for fuels management. And I think a lot of us, what happens with all of us, especially during COVID, is we're all so siloed and we're not talking a whole lot. And even think some kind of conference or convening around professionals, especially in the grazing aspect of things, to just have us get together and share information and talk about our challenges around it.
Absolutely.
So.
Thank you for sharing. I like it. Those are excellent ideas, and I think we can find those a home within these regional priorities. Absolutely. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I guess in the room, anything you guys want to add?
The last person was Gina?
Dina Robertson.
Okay. Because I'm watching a cattle water tank in the Briones reservoir watershed being resupplied by Laura Tyndall. She drives a water truck in our area. I guess you know about that.
I'm not familiar now.
Oh, okay. She's got a big red water truck, and I see it. A lot of people in our area are getting water deliveries already. It's residential. And there's a tank set up on the hillside and with a fence around it, and somebody with a water truck is pumping into it already. So it's maybe it's happening unofficially, but it's working. So
Find out more about that.
Yeah.
Sources and-
We can look into it.
yeah, the contractor's name is Laura Tyndall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Tammy, I see your hand raised.
Hi again. Sorry if I'm late to the game on this one, but is this plan also looking at potential man-made ignition sources? I'm thinking, for us, we have a lot of cars pull around the side of the road off of 580 that are burning or in trouble. We have a lot of encampments that are a huge source of fire for at least Zone 7 in some of our, unfortunately, our restoration and conservation areas. So just wondering where that fits in with this discussion.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point and an interesting question. I would open it up to other folks too if they want to respond to it, but I mean, certainly fuel ignition is a significant part of this. If we can stop it before it gets to it, that's going to save us all in the long run. So I'm going to admit, I'm going to have to sit and think on that one. I'm sure it has a home in here. Trying to reduce ignition sources maybe along roadsides or through better vegetation management along roadsides or invasive weed management especially too. So yeah, I see natural resource implications there, but I don't have a better answer for you than that. But I will follow up with you again after I get that data from you.
What was Tammy's actual question about that? She's just saying that car fires and random sources of ignition are affecting brushing.
Yeah, down in the Zone 7 Water Agency, yeah. Well, it's starting to get into some of the restorations down there, so.
Okay.
But I think that could be maybe an education bit. I mean, not knowing where every ignition source is, but, certainly from chains on trailers and stuff, I've seen those sparking on the sides of roads. Tammy, if you want to jump in, feel free, but.
Right. I can't, we obviously can't control the cars on 580 or the highways, but I know for us in particular, the main source of ignition is in usually our restoration areas where a lot of the encampments are set up, some pretty significant ones. And those have been sources of pretty big fires as far as we're concerned. We don't own a lot of really quote unquote wild land. They're mostly along our channels. But that is a concern for us because obviously we're trying to do the right thing by planting and maintaining vegetation, but it also encourages occupation and that leads to fire, which affects us on a number of levels. So
yeah. No, I think there's definitely a home for that. And maybe it sounds almost like the need is a little bit for some more information too. and trying to get a little bit more into strategies around preventing that, maybe in some of that long-term planning and management. Lily, you have your hand up.
Yeah, one other question for now, I guess, is how are you guys addressing other plans in the area? Like, I know East Bay Parks has a long-term planning effort and they take up a big chunk of the 2 counties. But there'd be no reason to redo it, but is it being incorporated some other way?
Yes, you've jumped the gun. So I'll come back to here. I'll give a quick spiel about our project list, and then I'll come back if folks want to talk more about this. But so we thank those of you that submitted projects to us. We had 7 people put them in, by and large from smaller, more maybe community-focused groups, and a little bit from the Fire Safe Council, as opposed to some of these larger agencies. But we also did some homework over the last year and more or less distilled down some parts of the community wildfire prevention plans that are active right now in both Contra Costa and Alameda County. We looked at East Bay Park and other large landowners here, and some of their veg management plans, I think, from the last couple of years, really to pull out some of those specific projects, and then largely, you know, if they fit the regional priority plan criteria, right, where we're looking specifically at how can we protect natural resources from wildfire and all that good stuff. If a project kind of checked any of those boxes, it's broadly on our regional project list, which we are going to be sharing out here. I don't think it'll happen today, but that'll probably happen a little bit later as we do some work on it. But that's where some of the work that some of these larger agencies have already done is being kind of folded into this. But I believe we hit most of the major landowners. It's what is it, 168 long list. So we'll be appending the 7 projects that we heard onto that project list. And then we're not going to try to rank those. We feel that that is just not our place. We'll let the funders ultimately do that. But we did want to have the projects that were submitted and the projects we know about on this list to say, you know, here's all the information we've got in Contra Costa and Alameda. Here's all the efforts that have already been done, and all the projects that have already been identified. You know, and now they're in one kind of more or less centralized location, so that we could inform state agencies like, you know, okay, here's the picture as we see it right now. And here are all the projects that we've all identified kind of collectively and then through other planning efforts. So yeah, does that answer your question, Lily?
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. All right, I'll go back. So that was, I think, the last slide. So I'll go back to this one just in case there was other feedback. Tammy, I think your hand is still up. I don't know if you had another question, but feel free. All right. Any other questions, comments, anything else? All right, seeing none. So once again, we're still taking feedback. If you have it, if you didn't want to say something now, you absolutely can shoot us an email. We're happy to talk more. We'll be accepting comment on this kind of through April 15th. And we'll get that final list shortly after that date. So moving right along. I think that's, yeah. Courtney, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, just the final timeline. So as Ben just mentioned, you have until April 15th to get us your comments. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves, talk to your colleagues. What did we miss? What details would you like to see on here? Shoot us an email with that information or give us a call. Happy to add it and discuss. Then we'll need a few days to incorporate all those changes and feedback. And by April 20th, we'll send you a link where you can start ranking the projects. And then that will be open until May 11th. As Ben mentioned, that link you can feel free to share with your colleagues and neighbors as well, so that we get the widest breadth of stakeholders that we can. We're including information of what agency generally you are from or what type of organization you're from, so that we can just kind of double check to make sure that we're hitting all of the groups that we were hoping to hear from. You have until May 11th to do that ranking. We'll send you a few emails to remind you to do that along the way. Then our next meeting is scheduled for June 1st. That will be our 6th and final meeting, and at that meeting we will kind of run through the final report that we're planning on submitting. So it'll have that ranked list, it will have the list of all the projects, and it will have some background information about the county as well. And then you will have some time to read through that, submit comments up through June 15th. After which we will be working to finalize that and submit it for final approval. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hands about that timeline or drop them in the chat.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Who do you submit it to for final approval?
That's been a great question. I know Lily Allen here is with the Coastal Conservancy. We'll probably be sharing it with them since they were the ones that funded this effort. But by and large, after that, it will exist online for folks to refer to as they are writing grants or seeking funding. We'll probably send it off to both county supervisor or both sets of county supervisors just to make them aware of what we're going on or what we've done and all that. Lily, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and we will be sharing it with the Department of Conservation as well, who we get our funding for this program for.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, any other questions or anything? All right, with that, I think we're now adjourned, but we'll stay on the line if folks want to continue to ask us questions or say hello even or something like that. Otherwise, we are done. So thank you all for coming. We'll see you hopefully on June 1st. We'll send some details about that shortly. It'll probably be another hybrid style meeting like this one. You're more than welcome to come and join us or feel free to Zoom in too. So thank you all for your time.